Well, Mr Speaker, I move that this House, on behalf of the people of New South Wales, apologises unreservedly to the Aboriginal people of Australia for the systematic separation of generations of Aboriginal children from their parents, families and communities, acknowledges and regrets Parliament's role in enacting laws and endorsing policies of successive governments whereby profound grief and loss have been inflicted upon Aboriginal Australians, calls upon all Australian governments to respond with compassion, understanding and justice to the report of the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission entitled Bringing Them Home, and reaffirms its commitment to the goals and processes of reconciliation in New South Wales and throughout Australia. The House's unanimous resolution, Mr Speaker, of November the 14th last year was a landmark in this country's move to reconciliation. In moving that resolution, I referred to the National Inquiry. I extended on behalf of the Government and people of New South Wales our apology to the Aboriginal people. We became the first Parliament to do that. The Human Rights Commission has now published its report. It's called Bringing Them Home. It's a profoundly moving, deeply disturbing document. It has stirred the conscience of our nation. The lost generations of the stolen children have been given a voice at long last. We've been privileged to hear their message from Nancy de Vries. No more memorable and moving words have been spoken in this Parliament in the past 150 years. Mr Speaker, in the introduction to its report, the Human Rights Commission quotes from one of more than 500 testimonies the inquiry heard from Link Up, the organisation devoted to reuniting Aboriginal families in this state and throughout Australia. Link Up said, "We may go home, but we cannot relive our childhoods. We may reunite with our mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, aunties, uncles, communities, but we cannot relive the 20, 30, 40 years that we spent without their love and care, and they cannot undo the grief and mourning they felt when we were separated from them. We can go home to ourselves as Aboriginals, but this does not erase the attacks inflicted on our hearts, minds, bodies and souls by caretakers who thought their mission was to eliminate us as Aboriginals." Well, Mr Speaker, that's what Nancy has put to us today, although in her case the separation is beyond those 40 years, but 50 years separated from her mother. That link-up statement and Nancy's statement to this House distill the hurt that Aboriginal people feel today about these matters. We're not dealing with some abstraction from the remote past. We're confronted with continuing contemporary pain, grief and loss, as has been demonstrated in this House this morning. The link-up statement goes directly to the root cause of this immense human tragedy, not only the specific issue of the stolen children, but the wider complex question of our relationship with the Aboriginal people of this continent, the homeland that we share together. Let me emphasise these words: caretakers who thought their mission was to eliminate us as Aboriginals. What a wealth of meaning and instruction that phrase contains. The report acknowledges, and I gladly acknowledge, the many foster and adopted relationships which grew up in a spirit of love, trust and hope. Good, decent Australians also caught up in the web of this tragedy. But while the report, in line with its terms of reference, focuses on forcible removal, it makes it painfully clear that the whole system of child separation was deeply tainted from the beginning, corrupted at its heart, not so much by the conduct of individuals or institutions acting under the law, but by the law itself and the official attitudes underpinning it, not least the laws and attitudes of this Parliament of New South Wales, acting in the name of the people of New South Wales. This great Parliament was the ultimate caretaker. We cannot ignore the overwhelming evidence before the Human Rights Commission that for a century this Parliament supported laws which inflicted and continue to inflict grief, suffering and humiliation. Laws designed, in the words of the link-up statement, quote, to eliminate us as Aboriginals, unquote. That is why this House must apologise. And that is why today, in the presence of members of the stolen generation, I reiterate the words I spoke in this chamber on November the 14th last year. Quote, I reaffirm in this place, formally and solemnly as Premier, on behalf of the Government and people of New South Wales, our apology to the Aboriginal people. I invite the House to join me in that apology, unquote. Mr. Speaker, my own government's submission to the inquiry in June last year dealt very frankly with this Parliament's role. A key piece of legislation in the process was the Aborigines Protection Amending Act of 1915. In his second reading speech, the then Chief Secretary declared the purpose of the bill, quote, if we give the Protection Board these powers, that is, to take children from their parents on the sole ground of their Aboriginality, the Aboriginals will soon become a negligible quantity and the young people will merge into the present civilisation and become very worthy citizens, unquote. Mr. Speaker, the House will better understand the bipartisan nature of our responsibility in the eye of history when I recall that the Minister was George Black, a foundation member of the Australian Labor Party in 1891, and that the government in 1915 was one of the great reforming Labor governments of New South Wales under Premier W.A. Holman. It is, of course, one example of a wider truth, that the Australian story is many stories, that we can take pride in the achievements of the pioneer generations and celebrate what they did, while at the same time acknowledging the tragedy of Aboriginal dispossession. These coexist as themes in the Australian story, in our history. But as I have said, Mr. Speaker, in the case of the stolen generation, we're dealing with a living legacy. The testimony of physical and sexual abuse, of economic exploitation and social deprivation form only one part of the story. The deliberate attempt at psychological elimination, the denial of Aboriginal identity, remains the unhealing wound for many thousands of our fellow Australians. It's not surprising, therefore, Mr. Speaker, that the inquiry found, quote, many witnesses were taught to feel contempt for Aborigines. Those who knew their own heritage transferred that contempt to themselves, unquote. Yet in truth, Mr. Speaker, the most remarkable characteristic of the Aboriginal community, the brightest hope for the future, is absence of hatred, the faith that, despite everything, justice will prevail, that these people who suffered such an injustice can deal today with us without a sense of hatred, is a great statement about the nature of our Aboriginal citizens, about the Aboriginal people. Mr. Speaker, when I moved the resolution of November the 14th, I outlined the government's specific programs to advance the cause of reconciliation. The Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the National Party spoke in equally positive and constructive terms. I believe we're similarly obliged to respond to the report of the Human Rights Commission. It contains 54 recommendations which are now being carefully analysed by the New South Wales Government. Today I make some initial comments. On child welfare, we're already reviewing child welfare legislation, and an Aboriginal officer has been seconded to the Department of Community Services to ensure that Aboriginal communities are properly consulted in this process. An important part of this review is to ensure child welfare laws provide adequate support for Aboriginal communities to care for their children. On oral history, more than 535 Aboriginal people told their stories in the course of the national inquiry. For most, it was their first chance to describe to a government official the impact of these policies on their lives. However, due to the limitations of the inquiry, many people are still waiting for the chance to tell their story. This is part of Australian history, and it should be recorded. I'll be asking the State Library to work with the relevant government and Aboriginal organisations to establish an oral history strategy. When it comes to Link Up, in recognition of the important role of this Aboriginal organisation, a grant of $100,000 will be allocated to further counselling and family reunion services. I take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank Link Up for their tireless efforts over many years and their dedication to the immensely important task of reuniting Aboriginal families. Mr. Speaker, the National Inquiry documented the immense grief and hurt that still exists within the Aboriginal community. Now that the extent of these policies has been fully revealed, there is a sadness not only among Aboriginal people but also in the broader community. This aspect of Australia's history is worthy of commemoration, and I extend an invitation to Aboriginal organisations and communities for their ideas on what may be appropriate as a permanent memorial. While for many the search is over, others are still trying to trace their origins. A significant section of the report of the National Inquiry dealt with access to records. Today I can announce that the New South Wales Department of Aboriginal Affairs will convene a working group to analyse these recommendations in detail and develop a strategy for improving access to records in New South Wales. Normally, about 90% of all government records are destroyed in accordance with the Archives Act. To ensure that valuable information is not inadvertently discarded, a moratorium on destroying government records relevant to the separation of Aboriginal families will be implemented for 1 year while the working group develops its strategy. The files of the former Aborigines Welfare Board constitute the most significant body of archival records documenting this area of government policy during the 20th century, and we've already made the preservation of this information a priority. Mr. Speaker, the real advances will come from the community itself. The report has shocked but also galvanised the community throughout New South Wales and Australia. Schools and churches have spontaneously offered their apologies. The Local Government Association of New South Wales adopted a resolution, and I quote, that the members of the State Executive of the Local Government Association unreservedly apologise for the appalling treatment of the Aboriginal people, unquote. With that resolution, and the one I hope the Parliament will endorse today, 2 tiers of government have formally apologised to Aboriginal people. We now await the third. Mr. Speaker, the apology of this Parliament, extended today, is an act of recognition and acceptance. The recognition of deep wrongs, mistaken policies and misguided attitudes, and the acceptance of responsibility where it belongs. It brings to an end the denial of truth and history, which has always been the great barrier against reconciliation. No longer can any of us say, we did not know or we did not understand. There is a special significance in the title of the report, Bringing Them Home. The Commission has dedicated this report to, quote, the generations of Aboriginal children taken from their families and communities, those who are still searching for home, and to the memory of the children who will never return, unquote. But in a deeper sense, this report is dedicated to all Australians who love this land and who believe in its great future, all of us who call Australia home. For Mr. Speaker, the meaning of reconciliation, the purpose of our apology today, the lessons we take from this report, our acceptance of its hard truths, our determination to make amends, all these things can best be understood and fully realised as part of a great national act of bringing us all home. The path home for all Australians lies through the achievement of justice, equality and respect for the Aboriginal people of Australia.
I call the leader.